can't just study science to understand these matters of spirituality. To really get an all-encompassed view, we need to actually have a conversation with someone that's had spiritual experiences. Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Whether your interest is Atlantis to Zeus, cuneiform to quantum physics, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangean mountain range. We are the one-stop shop for mystery, history, and comparative mythology. We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancient, mysterious, and unknown with logic and reason, where we also theorize the geometric fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual. Only trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation on some very fringe topics, so if applying the Socratic method on those topics is disturbing to you, you'll want to turn off the podcast now. And it's good to be here. We got a special guest lined up who was in the occult and then shifted back over to being a Christian after experiencing things in the occult. And he had some very interesting out-of-body experiences and some very interesting visions as well that he shared with us that I think make for a very good conversation to have in relation to everything we're talking about with Psych and Spirit, because you have all this broad range of experiences where you have Karen Wilkinson, you have Vicky Joy Anderson, you have Linda Sigmund from the Mothman Festival, and we did that interview back in episode 21, 18, something in there. I can't even remember. But yeah, like about a year ago, we had that episode, and you have these people that have all of these really unique and diverse experiences on spiritual things. He had, like, I think the thing getting trapped in the mirror is definitely we haven't once again already recorded it, so I don't want to spoil everything. Yes. But there's some very interesting experiences where it's like it's relative, as far as we can, it's relatively objectively quantifiable in terms of external verification if you trust him to be telling the truth, which again, I have no reason to distrust, but that's an individual choice for listeners. But I mean, there's stuff out there that we don't know how to really quantify or understand and that science can't touch, but that people have experiences with. And then you're faced with the question, is this benevolent or is it dangerous? Yeah. And so this does approach it from a Christian perspective. Once again, I know we've kind of had a couple episodes back to back from more of a bold Christian perspective. So I hope we're not offending any of our non-Christian listeners out there. But once again, I'm challenging you to think about this from the Socratic method here, to think about it from this worldview and to consider, when we're looking at things like spirituality, we don't know if it's dangerous. I mean, even those that are more in the New Age, I believe, adhere to, hey, there are certain entities out there that are dangerous and that are trying to deceive you. And so I think it warrants caution in how we think about this and how we quantify this. So anything that you wanted to say from our conversation to prep our listeners for the talk that we had?
I think you pretty well summed it up. It's valuable to have someone like this on. He has unique perspectives, having been on both sides of this. Like you said, we can study a lot, but there's people that have experienced this stuff directly, and that gives a very valuable perspective. And then when you've got someone who's experienced completely different sides of it, having them compare and contrast, that's very, very informative.
I agree. And his journey was kind of similar to mine in the broad sense of he went down more New Age and occult. Mine was just more philosophical questioning, and that was it. And it didn't really take me too far. It was just more of a, hey, is there a God? How do I quantify this? Let me philosophically play with the idea. And I didn't really go anywhere, just kind of thought about it for a while and then came back to Christianity. And whereas he like kind of went down this whole trail of the New Age and all sorts of other stuff tied into that. So it was kind of interesting to hear his perspective and journey. But without further ado, we will shift right over to the interview. right, so we've got Jacob on the line with us here. So Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'll let you introduce yourself, and then you can tell us your story.
For sure, and appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with me. Very excited. But yeah, so basically, in a nutshell, I grew up Christian, grew up in kind of just a conventional Southern Baptist household, and I sort of always had an interest in meditative practices because I was always really into martial arts and stuff like that. And I kind of didn't really see any problem with that sort of thing. But what ended up happening when I was a bit older, I was about 20 or so, is I had a pretty jarring spiritual experience. I had an out of body experience, and it was not something that I had any real context for, or I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't looking for it. And so it kind of rattled me a bit, and I didn't really know what to think of this. And it sort of came out of like just a meditation section. So I was kind of thinking, well, I didn't do anything wrong. So surely it's not anything bad. If it's not anything bad, then it's worth exploring. The problem is, I can't talk to Christians about it because they just insist that it's satanic. And I'm just like, well, I don't know. It felt good and it seemed good. And I don't, I kind of want answers. I want to have a more in depth talk about this other than just don't do it. And so, I was young and I didn't really have a good community around me. So I kind of just went looking for answers to that. And it led me into the new age. And I very quickly realized that the new age is a bunch of garbage. It's very uh, very superficial. There's not really any substance to it, but there were a couple of interesting concepts, and I kind of dived into those concepts, and I realized, okay, there's actual mechanics behind this kind of cultural trend, and I want to know like where did this stuff come from? And that led me into the occult because it is where it comes from. And I spent a couple years researching that. I ended up initiated into a hermetic tradition, so I was a
Mm.
practicing ceremonial magician for a few years. And there's a lot that happened in that time. Uh, Very little of it was good, but I kind of just it ran its course. I kind of developed within that sphere, and I was kind of realizing there's more answers than there are, or excuse me, there's more questions than there are answers. It kind of feels like a hall of mirrors. Every time I learn something new, there's more doors that open up, more questions. And it's not like, okay, there's more stuff to learn. It's more like there's more things that I want to believe, but they're less able to coexist. Like there's more inconsistencies the further I get into this. But I was kind of thinking out along the lines of the experience is real though. Like I'm seeing things happen and I'm experiencing real changes, and there's profound, verifiable spiritual encounters that are happening, things that, other people outside of myself can attest to and validate. Something, okay, this can't just be complete nonsense. There has to be something here. And I was really just kind of searching and trying to unravel all that and figure it out. And uh, in conjunction with all this, my life is kind of going. I was doing my best to get my life together. I kind of dipped off there for a minute and got into some bad habits. And I had spent maybe about 2 years prior to my conversion. I'd spent about 2 years kind of getting my life back together, getting out of the bad stuff. But I was kind of realizing that no matter what I do, no matter how much I fix things, like it doesn't really change the emptiness that I'm feeling. And none of these answers are really satisfactory. None of the things that I'm learning are helping me. They're just kind of pushing me further down this path. And I'm kind of realizing that there's kind of like what we were talking about a second ago before we started. I do believe that there is some sort of spiritual dimension, reality. I don't know the right word for it, but there's something there. And what I was becoming aware of is that I can learn certain things and I can do certain things. However, I don't really know what's happening, and I can't directly perceive any of this stuff. So I'm kind of just guessing, and I'm kind of just going off of the results that I get. And those are somewhat inconsistent. And even when they are consistent, how do I know that I'm not being tricked? And that was basically where the thread that I was pulling on is we can get kind of into the philosophies a bit more if you like, but I've kind of gotten into some stuff where I was realizing I don't actually know what's true anymore. And that's a little bit disorienting. And I kind of dealt with it for a while. I was like, okay, that's just part of the process. You just have to push through that. You have to explore. But at some point, I started to realize, well, but how do I know if I do fix? if I do figure it out, how do I know that these entities, these spirits, are not just lying to me? Because everyone says that this one philosophy says that this is the answer. This other philosophy says this is the answer. They don't go together. And we know that there's these tricksters and deceivers, and like, how do I know that I am on the right track or not? Because I can't just go off of what I think and what I feel. I need some kind of safety here. I need to figure this out. It's starting to become a point of like, not panic, but I was worried. I was like, I don't want to spend my whole life doing the wrong thing, chasing the wrong stuff. And I'm also noticing, whatever happens in my life outside of that, I'm just not doing well. I've got this emptiness inside of me. Things are going good in, certain ways, but then just, emotionally I'm fairly stable, but I'm hiding something. I'm carrying this weight that I can't get rid of. And I'm kind of realizing that there's a certain brokenness on a really fundamental level that I just can't handle, and I can't fix it. And I can maybe tough it out and push through it, but I can't heal it. And that was sort of when everything came together. And I didn't give up searching, but I was at a place where it's like, dang, like I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure out the answers to these questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to heal problems that I have. And what do you do? It's like, well, I guess I just keep going. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep pushing through. But I kind of felt a little bit of hopelessness, and that's when I had another very powerful spiritual experience. But this time, I had a vision of Christ, and I sort of wanted to bombard him with a bunch of questions. Like, I didn't understand why I was having this experience. Definitely wasn't looking for it. I wasn't um, I wasn't interested in Christianity in any way. Kind of given up on all that stuff, but I was so overwhelmed by who he was and the love that I felt, and I could tell that he wanted to offer me something, but I would have to give up, or at least be willing to give up what I had accomplished over these last few years. It was really difficult, and I had a bunch of questions, and I wasn't totally convinced right away, but we had a very brief conversation, and that experience just rattled me so much that I realized, you know, he's worth following, and this is what I'm going to do, even though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm going to take a couple steps of faith and see what happens. And since then, my life has basically just been that, just developing faith, just getting out of the esoteric, the occult stuff. There's been a lot of healing that's come with that, because it's very destructive on your soul, on your mind, on your body in some ways, but especially just emotionally, spiritually. And so, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So now I'm back. I'm actually getting baptized into the Orthodox tradition here pretty soon, so I'm very excited about that. So yeah, the last couple of years have been a radical change, and it was all because of that one encounter. So yeah.
That's a powerful testimony there. A couple questions I'll ask off of that. So when you were saying that, like, there was a lot of stuff going on in the beginning when you got involved into the occult a bit more, and you said most of it wasn't good. Is that something that you were like consciously aware of, or was there like a deception aspect going on with the occult with it, where you thought it was good, but it really wasn't in hindsight?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to unravel everything all at once, but essentially, when if you're following this, eh, I was basically a spiritual seeker, and so you can't say the occult has this one philosophy or the New Age has this one philosophy. There's going to be some pretty wide variations, and you can find one person who has certain beliefs, and then somebody else is totally different, which is kind of part of the way that it's set up. Is that you're supposed to be developing your own understanding of God and of spirituality, which means that everybody has their own interpretation. So it gets a little bit weird. I will say that there's certain principles, there's certain general broad statements that tend to apply, and again, it depends on who exactly you talk to and which tradition you're coming from. But things like moral relativism is pretty common. This idea that there's not necessarily good and evil, or that good and evil are basically just two ends of the same spectrum. And when you think about things in that term, in that sense, and you have this philosophy of like, I'm a spiritual seeker, I'm not necessarily going to stand in judgment. I'm going to have to maybe pay like a karmic debt of some kind, but I'm not going to stand before God and have to give account of everything that I've done. You kind of just, it's your mindset shifts a little bit, especially when you think about things in terms of like, well, what is evil anyway? Because if you take out a traditional view of, say, uh, like drugs or sexual immorality, or even dishonesty and things like that, like you can kind of manipulate morality a little bit, at least in your own mind. And so it kind of becomes, well, as long as I don't hurt anybody, then it's not a big deal. Or as long as I'm not going after other people, I'm not taking things from them, um I'm not trying to rob them of their resources, or physically harm them or anything like that, emotionally harm them. As long as I feel like I'm being a good person, then I'm, whatever, maybe it's not such a big deal. So it's easy to make bad decisions. It's easy to get caught up with the wrong people and to not really feel guilty about it, because, it's like, well, if morality is just, I think I'm a good person, then that kind of spirals out pretty quickly. So, I ended up partying a lot, ended up doing a lot of the things that, any Christian will tell you you can't do that. Like, you got to stop. And kind of went, I was kind of at a college age, so it wasn't like super like off the beaten path for a normal human experience. But there's definitely some stuff that left me with bad habits. That left me with unfortunately some traumatic experiences, just because
Mm.
I was in dangerous situations. I was around people who were, predatory. And you say, well, it's not a big deal if you just date around and you hang out with the wrong crowd. Well, until you realize that a lot of people actually do want to hurt you, and a lot of people, even if you remove your responsibility from the equation, like, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna get taken advantage of. Bad things will happen to you. So I was having some money issues, having some substance abuse issues. I was having some just general health stuff because I wasn't taking care of myself the way I should have been. And yeah, so that, that was the worst of that, was kind of, I guess, a phase. The real problem behind it wasn't so much that it happened, as that the reasoning behind my decisions that stayed with me. So I said, okay, well, I'm not going to do drugs anymore. I'm not going to sleep around anymore, or else I'm going to be smart about it. The problem is that the fundamental motivation behind that was the same. I was just trying to be a bit smarter about it and protect myself. I didn't see a problem with the actual behavior, and obviously, God sees a problem with it. So there are consequences to actions, and even if it doesn't look the way that you think it will, or the way people say it does, that stuff stays with you. Like, even if you only look at this life and having to deal with the mistakes that you've made earlier on. If you made some big mistakes, I mean, it takes time to work that stuff out. Even
Mm.
if you get your life back together, it's, there's trauma that stays with you. There's bad habits that stay with you. There's echoes of the past that just, people that follow you. So yeah.
It's interesting you kind of fixated there for a while on the not knowing like truth aspect, and that the truth was subjective, because we just had a conversation with Dr. Lake, Dr. Michael Lake, and he was talking about the occult, and he was also discussing that. So as kind of interesting to see that you were really affirming, his point and his expertise there. There's so much still to unpack in everything that you've said here, but you talked about how like others could confirm the experiences. Can you elaborate what you mean on that? Were you like able to interact with other people in out of body experiences, or is that just something, more simplistic?
Yeah. So there just, again, as like a couple of general examples. When I first started, I was sort of just trying to practice magic alone in my room, which I think is how most people start. And in that situation, it was more so that, uh, do you want stories, or you just want like general examples?
It's up to whatever you feel led to and whatever you're comfortable sharing.
So, I mean, I don't know like what kind of audience you have. I'm just gonna say, I'll share a little bit, but for example, I had this weird thing, and I don't know how much of this is I don't know exactly what happened, but I was having an issue with being haunted, and I was seeing things. Things were moving, and so the first relationship that I was in, for example, during this time, we would kind of compare notes, and we would like, she would see like I'm like, hey, you see the door opening right now, correct? Like that's not us doing that. She'd be like, yeah, yeah, of course. Or like you did see the cup fly off the counter at my cat, correct? She's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But then it kind of developed past that, because at first it was just like, oh, this is fun. Like, oh, there's actually spirits interacting with us. This is like real, interesting. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, what can I do with that though? So then the next step was, well, how can I exert power over them? So maybe a year or two goes by, and I was tired of one in particular because it was kind of freaking me out. It was just really persistent, and I mean, I don't actually know if it was one demon or not. That was my perception of it. I could be wrong, but I decided that I would trap it in my bathroom mirror. And again, this is like how much of it is I actually did that, and how much of it is it's just playing with me and it wants me to think that. I don't know. However, the story is that I knew that it was in there, and I had an issue every time I would go get ready for bed, because I try to brush my teeth and I would like see this thing in the mirror. And at that point, I was just so in this life that it didn't really seem like a big deal to me. I just didn't look in the mirror. Well, I didn't tell anybody this because I didn't, want people to come hang out with me. I don't want people to like not come over. So every time people would visit, I would just not say anything. And consistently, every single time, people would freak out when they went to the bathroom. Like, what in the world? I looked in my reflection, and my face changed into something else. It changed into a demon. It changed into some kind of reptilian shape or something, or it turned into somebody else. And that was pretty consistent. And I thought that was kind of spooky, but I didn't take that as a red flag to stop. And then further down the line, getting into ceremonial magic, you're in a group of people, you're working with other folk, and so you can kind of compare notes. And it's one thing if I say, man, like I saw somebody, or I saw a spirit standing in the corner over there. It's another thing when I see something and I'm like, ooh, that freaked me out. I don't like that. I don't want to talk about it. And then somebody else describes exactly what it was. It's like, ooh,
Mm.
that's spooky. And so when you start to get into that kind of thing, and then you have a dozen people that are all seeing the same thing, and it's like it's consistent, that's when it starts to get a little bit more real. And you start to think, well, what's actually happening? Because something's interacting with us, and we can perceive it somehow, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually in control or that we really know what's going on. So
Wow, that's really fascinating. I know you'd mentioned, I think with your first experiences, it was kind of the new age, and then it sort of went into the occult. Could you
yep.
describe what some of the differences are between those two categories? Like, is there overlap, or are they completely different things?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to think about it without getting too far down the rabbit hole is just that the new age is sort of a Trojan horse. It's kind of a smokescreen.
Okay.
When I first started doing content on it, I had a really hard time, because I would just try to find out, what do new agers say? Like, what are these claims that are made? And I'm just going to refute that. I'm just going to re- you know
Hmm.
think of a response and show why it doesn't make sense. And I started doing that, and I was like, this is just, it's weak. It's not really landing, and I can feel that before I even post this. I don't want to put this out there. It just seems really cliche and generic. And it took me a lot of thought. I finally kind of started to click for me. I'm like, because this isn't really what's going on. Like these things that the kind of cultural, the trending things about manifestation and alignment and all this other stuff. It's like it's really a very superficial thing. It's kind of just a linguistic trick almost. I mean, there's not a lot of real substance to it.
Hmm.
And what's important to get at is the principles behind it. And I kind of realized, well, I'm a very inquisitive person. Same reason, like I'm as a Christian now. I was Protestant for a few years, and I couldn't stay Protestant because like I needed more depth, and that's why I ended up in Orthodoxy. It's part of the reason anyway. But I mean, at that time of my life, it was the same thing. It's like I like what the New Age is saying at this. particular point, I like the stuff about, the chakras and the energy work and the
Mhm.
manifestation and all this other stuff. It makes sense, but it's just not deep enough. And so I kind of was looking for principles, like what is the actual mechanics behind this? How,
Yeah.
you're saying that we're aligning our chakras. Well, why should I believe you? Like I kind of do. I'm inclined to believe you, but I actually want the proof. Like I actually want you to explain it to me in detail in a way that like I can't argue against it. And they just couldn't do it. I spent maybe a year or two like really seriously researching, and I kind of just started to realize, the more the stuff with substance is just not within this cultural context. So, in broad strokes, again, the new age, the new age is meant to be a new age of consciousness. So it's supposed to be that humanity is evolving spiritually,
Okay.
and there's a couple different things behind why they think that is. Um, there's a racial thing, and then there's a like an astrological thing, and there's a couple other components. But so they think we're entering a new age of consciousness where we're going to shed the past. We're not going to be bound by tradition anymore. So religions are going to become united. The things that separate them are going to start to dissolve. So the major theological differences that keep religions from meshing well, that those are going to be overcome because they believe that the truth is there's a spark of truth within each different religion, but none of them are quite right because people have messed them up. So they think that we're going to shed that, we're going to move into this new age. And so with that, you kind of get this buffet style spirituality,
Mm.
because if the idea is that spirituality in general is, or excuse me, religion in general has truth in it, but nothing is quite true. What we can do is we have to find what's true, and so we can borrow from Eastern religions, we can borrow from Christianity, we can borrow from any of these esoteric or occult systems, and we kind of pick and choose what we want. And if things overlap, great. If not, well, it's not a big deal. Like we don't really understand where we're going. The point of it is that we're ascending, we're moving upwards, we're developing. So that's kind of the new age approach. Again, very broad strokes. And the occult in general is it tends to be a little bit more of an elitist kind of approach. It's not so much about everyone doing this thing. It's
Mm.
more so that there's some kind of secret hidden knowledge, and that you have to find it. And when you find it, the resulting enlightenment, the fact that you now have this mental upgrade, that will save you, that will make you divine in some way, and you will be powerful enough to basically save your soul. And they'll phrase it differently, but that's generally is that you have to figure this stuff out for yourself. You have to practice, whether it's alchemy, whether it's whatever
Mm.
system. It's more so about taking that control and that power, and it's less about humanity moving in a certain direction. But it does tend to drive New Age stuff, and the people that really founded and moved the New Age trend, I guess, were occultists.
Okay.
So yeah.
So basically, the New Age is kind of like the Build-A-Bear of religion, and then the occult is more like being a pirate and trying to find treasure.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
I like to reframe things a little bit from a different perspective. No, that was a good insight. Thank you for that explanation. So then, can you kind of off of that reframe what magic is and what you mean by magic?
Yeah. I might butcher the quote. I like Aleister Crowley's
Mm,
definition of magic, which again, I might get it a little bit wrong, but he basically said that it's the art and science of causing changes to happen in accordance with the will. And so it's
Mm.
kind of implied that it's not. So like if you say, well, I believe in cause and effect, I want to work harder and I'll have more money.
Yeah.
Like that's not magical, obviously. But if I say I'm going to focus all of my mental spiritual resources on money magically manifesting in my account, and I'm not going to really take any decisive action to make that happen, I'm trying to produce the change solely out of my will. That's when you start to get into, well, how is that happening, like tangibly? Like break down the mechanics of that for me. And they've got all these different theories about why. And again, there are traditions within occult philosophy, so it's going to depend on who you ask. But for example, if you're in a Western tradition, there's tends to be more focus on the ceremonial aspect. So you may actually draw out a circle, and you may actually go through this particular ritual where you're saying certain names, you're invoking certain spirits and deities at certain times in accordance with the alignment of the planets and any other aspect that you can bring into this. And there's certain alchemical themes and whatever else. Whereas Eastern traditions tend to be where you see more of the New Age kind of jargon. They tend to be more experiential, tends to be more meditative, and that's where you get things like your chakras and your a lot of the energy work kind of stuff. So basically, um, yeah, that's kind of the definition of magic that I stick with because Crowley's one of the most famous occultists of all time. Not everybody likes him. He's kind of a polarizing person, and plenty of occultists reject him. However, he is a authority on this subject, and they tend to point to these subtle kind of spiritual astral currents that sort of move through everything. And if you manipulate those spiritual currents with your own mind, your own soul, and it ripples out and produces this outcome that you didn't work for, but you cast a spell of some sort. And they don't necessarily talk about it in that sense, but just to kind of make it a little bit more accessible, you're making things happen without you know, solely in a spiritual or mental way. There's probably something in there that you could tie back to some sort of sorcery.
Hmm.
So, do you believe that this involves some sort of direct control where you're actually using your mind to influence things, or do you think there would be demonic spirits doing kind of the in between work?
Probably more so on the latter. It's
Okay.
it's really impossible to say for sure. Um, I can tell you, and again, this is totally my experience. I'm not trying to
Hmm.
make any like for sure claims here, but what I noticed is that I like the Eastern stuff. It didn't quite fit for me.
Yeah.
I had a long term meditation practice, and I enjoyed that. And I liked doing like the manifestation exercises. I liked doing the energy work, but it didn't really work. One of the reasons that I settled in with ceremonial magic is that when I started doing it is I saw immediate results,
Hmm.
and those are specifically invoking spiritual entities by name. And so I kind of, you know, I'm not going to say that we're not doing anything spiritually. I think
Yeah.
that if you were to say that, though, that opens up the conversation of, well, what actually are you doing, right? Because
Hmm.
if you say, well, I manifested my dream relationship, it's like, okay, well, how do you know
Yeah.
how do you know that you weren't going to meet that person anyway, right? Like, just because you do this exercise doesn't mean anything. Whereas if you go and say, well, I did this particular spell, and the next day, 2 days later, there was a massive, noticeable, tangible change in my life. That's kind of suspicious,
Yeah.
at bare
Mhm.
minimum. Versus because like the experiential side, people say stuff all the time. Like, I love my manifestation exercise. I say my affirmations every day. It's like, okay, well, I've known you for 6 years. You're in the exact same position you always have been. So I don't think it's working. I think you should be a little bit more successful. But sure.
Oh, that's yeah.
Would it be accurate to say that a lot of the new age stuff is more closely tied to the East and the occult more connected with the West, the Western Hemisphere?
Um, I know where you're going with that. I think for maybe the average person that might suffice. If you're
Okay.
actually talking to somebody who's involved in it, they're going to take issue with that statement.
Okay.
Um, so the occults technically just means hidden, like it says,
Hmm.
it's hidden wisdom, it's hidden knowledge. So that's not necessarily tied to any tradition.
Yeah.
And a lot of occultists do reject their own tradition, and they'll just say, "Well, I'm going to pick up the fragments as I see fit." Whereas some they get involved in like a line of succession, and it's like this is the framework that I follow, and it's like
Yeah.
um, people are going to have different opinions on that. I think that in so one of the main uh, initiators of the New Age movement was Helena Blavatsky, and she was she was a mystic, and her focus was predominantly on Eastern practices. So there is going to be a lot of Eastern stuff in
Hmm.
that. If you read her books, especially The Secret Doctrine, it's mostly Hindu theology with, there's other stuff in there. I don't want to I
Yeah.
don't want to say anything too solid there, but I mean that is the majority of it. There's some Luciferian stuff in there too, but in general, she had more of a focus on the Eastern side of things. But at the same time, you'll see there's a lot of Hermetic influence, which is basically a product of Neoplatonic thought. So there's going to be a lot of Egyptian and Greek ideology behind that. And so when you see things like the Kabbalion, which is a book that's pretty accessible to most people, so you don't necessarily have to be an occultist to read that
Hmm.
book and to see value in it. I know secular people that love it and they think, oh, this is the mysteries of the universe, and it's like it's really not. But that's that is a modernized what's the right word, um, a, abomination of hermetic thought. So it's Western occultism. It's not pure hermeticism by any means, but it is close enough to be called that, and it is what most people start with. So again, that is a Western system, and it's people that get into it on that side of things, that it tends to be a little bit more experiential still, even though it's a Western influence. So in general, you're going to see a lot of Eastern thought in this movement, and it's kind of one of those things where if you trace it back even further, it all comes from Babylon anyway. So there's
Mm.
going to be some
Okay.
crossover. There's going to be some stuff that fits together, and some stuff that doesn't. Some of it's cultural, some of it's geographical. But yeah,
That makes sense.
Can you explain that? It all comes from Babylon. I'm curious.
yeah. So I mean, I mean, what was it? Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization.
Hmm.
If you look back in Genesis, you see they're building the Tower of Babel. Um, Babel was connected to Babylon because if you read through the genealogies, in which everybody loves, I'm sure it's their favorite section, but you'll see that Nimrod is the one who founded both Babel and Babylon. And when you kind of you want to be careful reading between the lines, of course, but in general, when you look at what Babel was, it's an organized rebellion against God. It's people that are making a name for themselves. There's elements of pride in that. There's also elements of spirituality in that. Um, when you there's some kind of full conspiracy theories around that. I won't get into that though, but just suffice it to say, you look at the Book of Enoch, and it talks about how the fallen angels taught mankind astrology, and you look at Babylonian star worship is the oldest form of magic that we know of. So astrology goes back way to the beginning, and according to these, I guess you could say, non-canonical books, are that comes directly from demons. And that was kind of one of the first big things that I touched on when I was trying to figure out, how do I refute this stuff? How do I address this? Because people were just, Christians are like, oh yeah, you shouldn't do astrology. Some of them don't take it seriously. But a lot of people, they have this like Pinterest, Instagram view of astrology. It's just kind of cute, and it's like, oh, it's like an aesthetic, and it, it's what everyone does, and it looks kind of nice, and it's just fun. It's like, that's actually the oldest system of sorcery that we know of.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's one of the things that God explicitly condemns as far as occult practices. The Probably the most often,
Mm.
um, mediums and astrologers and sorcerers are pretty repeatedly or repetitively condemned, and it, it has a lot to do with their exile in Babylon. You look at Ezekiel, the idolatry that they were performing. And there's also other things like murder and abortion and things like that that were a factor in that. But sorcery was a factor. And so um, when the Tower of Babel was under construction, everybody spoke one language, and if people at this point are receiving communication from demonic beings, and there's some, again, it's not explicitly said, but there's some implication of maybe not an organized religion, but again, we know that the Babylonians had this system of star worship. That was their religion. That's how it started. If you look and see, well, God confused the languages and spread everybody out, and you kind of see that all of these different pagan and occult traditions, they all kind of have these really similar trains of thought. There are a lot of consistencies, and there's plenty of differences also. But I mean, people get really fascinated with comparative religion. But when you kind of boil it down, like what are the real primary the principles that come up in this, and you see that they're all kind of demonic, and they all kind of show up in Genesis. And so and those are a lot of the things that we see now. So for example, the idea that if you eat the tree, if you excuse me, if you eat the from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you will become like God. You'll know good and evil. And this idea of I will, through knowledge, I will become divine. That's occultism.
Hmm.
That's all of these systems right there, right? And so you see that these whatever religion, if that's the right word or not, that they were practicing before the languages were confused, was distorted. It was broken up the same way as those languages what were, but the same way that we can look and see consistencies in languages throughout time, we can see the same thing in religion and these different occult practices, especially the traditions that have been semi preserved. So yeah, that kind of, if you look at the way it goes out east and you see this sort of experiential focus versus the west, it's a little bit more you see more secret initiatic traditions like the Eleusinian mysteries and Hermetic traditions and things like that. They tend to be a little bit more, I guess, organized, you could say.
That's interesting you say all of that. I have on my deep dive list, I haven't gotten to it yet, but I want to read the Nula Pin, which is the Babylonian star chart. And supposedly
Mhm.
it's more written in like almost an esoteric type. Not quite. It still charts the movement of the stars, but it's supposedly written in more of an esoteric type of metaphor where it uses mythology to almost teach the stars and the movements in a sense. And that's kind of what you're talking about here. So that's kind of reignited my interest to look into that a little bit more and see what that has to say in relation to what these belief systems were on these things.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, you mentioned Enoch and the Watchers a little bit in terms of your understanding on how to quantify and think about the occult. Could you expand on that a bit? What did like looking at Enoch and the demons being disembodied spirits of Nephilim, what did that idea kind of do and how you quantified all of this? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Do you have a unique take on that?
I don't have a particularly unique take. I think, yeah, no, that was honestly my main takeaway from those books. I thought that they were pretty boring for the most part, to be perfectly honest with you. A lot of it's describing celestial patterns, and I'm not like 100% sure. Like, is this like what is the point of this? But that particular thing, it just kind of struck me like it's really interesting that if a fallen angel were to teach something to somebody, and maybe they taught us more, but one, it's interesting that they want to interact, which is kind of terrifying. But why did they pick what they did? Why did they pick astrology? I think they took astrology, metallurgy, and cosmetics, so like makeup and stuff like that. It's like, why those three things? And I don't necessarily have any profound insights on that. I do kind of look at the way that it shows up, though. I'm again, I'm going to just kind of share what I'm speculating, but I'm very interested in the systems of the Babylonian thought, because you see, like in the Book of Daniel, when they're brought in, when the Jews are brought in for reprogramming, basically, they're Daniel and his friends. They have this really formalized system of brainwashing. Like, it's not just, hey, you're going to come live in this palace. Like, they have a formalized educational uh, system in place that is meant to change you radically into a Babylonian puppet. And that's not something that the book really dwells on, but that's interesting. Like, it takes some level of understanding of psychology to be able to do that. I saw. when I was in boot camp, I was interested in cults growing up in psychology. So it's like I kind of read about that stuff, and I noticed in boot camps like there's some cult type behavior going on. There's some actual brainwashing taking place, and I'm kind of just interested. Like that takes time to develop, and so when you look at things like, well, they were taught, uh, you know, metalworking and cosmetics and astrology. Like, so they were taught magic, they were taught how to wage war, basically, and they were taught how to seduce and deceive, how to change your appearance. And he kind of, there's some interesting parallels with the Book of Revelation, the Whore of Babylon, how, you know, God says that the whole world will be deceived through her sorceries and seduced by that spirit. I think that's interesting. I don't necessarily have anything particularly insightful on that. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but that is something that I am working on. I kind of want to follow that train of thought and just I want to flesh out what does that look like practically? Because we can talk conspiracies all day, and that's totally fine. That's fun, but like on a real level, I mean, we live in an era where we don't know what's going on. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know who um, Babylon is necessarily, the spirit of Babylon and Revelation. You could say maybe it's America, maybe it's Hollywood, who knows? Whether or not it is, there's definitely what's the word? There's definitely a pattern unfolding in terms of the Antichrist and the Babylonian influence that has preserved itself throughout the last few generations. And I would be interested in maybe quantifying a few of the ways that that shows up in our real world, the way that it influences our thought through entertainment, through culture, through governmental systems, economic systems, because my understanding of Revelation is that Babylon exerts basically a total control. Not total control where you have zero choice whatsoever, but think like if you can control the economics, if you can control the military and the religion and the entertainment of the world, and you can kind of influence the thought process through those things, all you really have to do, like, you really just have to have some sort of unifying, maybe philosophy is not the right word, but something that brings these different nations and traditions together. And I think that the New Age does that. Like, the New Age definitely overcomes a lot of the barriers that um, keep religions from really mixing together. So, because if you think the Antichrist and Revelation, all the world worships him. Well, how do you get the whole world to worship one person? How do you get Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and Shintos and even most Christians apparently to worship somebody? Well, you kind of have to transcend religion to do that. You need some sort of unifying philosophy. And
Mm.
when that philosophy comes from people who are actively using a system, again tying back to Enoch, who is meant to be deceptive and seductive, so you see the cosmetics, who is understands and has military capacity and has some sort of magical influence, which again I'm not sure how much that is the power of a person versus demons using somebody's willingness, but I do think that they exert real control over the world and in some very tangible ways. I think that that's just an interesting thing to get into, because how do you prepare, like, one, how do you point out, look, this is the Bible's prophecy coming true. This is, you know, if you see this, you should take it seriously and realize, hey, if this is real, what else is in the Bible is real. It's a great evangelical tool. At the same time, how do you support Christians that are going to be presented with really compelling deception? You know, because there's a lot of stuff that sounds good and it seems okay and it doesn't feel dangerous, but it is, and it can really, it can wreck your faith, it can wreck you spiritually, and it can really get you into a lot of trouble. And so I think following that train of thought is worth doing.
Mm. You hit on an interesting theme there with Babylon, and I just keep thinking back to the Enuma Elish and their worldview that's encapsulated in their whole creation story about this chaos monster that is then slain and tamed by Marduk, their chief deity, and is then used, you know, for their end. That the world is created from this chaos that is slain and then brought into order, and how that's a reflection of the Babylonian worldview. So no, I would agree. I think that, you know, everything you're saying here definitely lines up with what I've studied and seen in mythology on the Babylonian mindset. I do want to shift gears and hop back, though. Talk a little bit about the out of body experiences that you had, and then contrasting that to the experience that you had with Christ that kind of helped like ground you and reset everything a little bit. I'm curious to hear how those two delineate from each other.
Yeah. So the first one, um, again, it was very unexpected. I was just had finished a workout. I had stretched out, relaxed a little bit. I was doing just some meditation, and then I felt like a lot of pressure. I felt like my whole body was vibrating, and I sort of feel that way when I'm falling asleep. So, and I noticed that intensifies when I would meditate, and it was kind of uncomfortable, and it was really focused like on the top of my head for whatever reason. But I was like, I'm just going to relax and let it happen. And then next thing I know, it's hard to explain, but it was like waking up from a dream and going, "Oh, like this is like how did I think that was real? Like how did I think that I wasn't, that I was really there?" And I felt like that way about my life. I felt like I was in this state where I was like just pure energy. I felt very vibrant. Everything was vivid. uh, I could feel everything. I could see everything around me. I wasn't in you know this dimension anymore. It was some sort of spiritual area. There wasn't really any distinguishing features. It was kind of like being in a cloud, but like the whole cloud is energetic. And at
Mm.
this point, okay, well, let me back up. I saw a few other people there, and I could see myself, which is super weird. Like I could look through my fingers. I thought that was odd. Like I could look at my face through my fingers. So this is bizarre. And it didn't last very long. I kind of was trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and I became aware of like Earth and where I was, and it was sort of like looking at the Earth through a window, but not tangibly, not like with my eyes. Like I just knew where it was, and I kind of was like, "Oh, I think I know where I'm at." Like on this planet, and next thing I know, I'm back in my body, and that was a weird feeling too because it's very jarring. It feels like when you're falling asleep and like you have a dream that you slip and fall, and you wake up feeling with that feeling. That's kind of how I came back to my body, and it felt like falling asleep at the same time. If that makes any sense, it's like I was like that experience was much more real than what I'm doing now. And people have asked me, well, how do you know it wasn't mental? I don't, and maybe it was. All I can say is that it was very noticeable, and it was a very profound experience to me, to the point where I made some huge life decisions as far as I didn't just up and leave Christianity. What happened was a very slow, gradual progression where the only people that were talking about it were occultists and New Agers. And so I was just kind of going there for information. I was like, okay, well, they're saying the way they're describing astral projection kind of makes sense in the way that would like to think about it. And they're kind of framing it as it's not magic, it's not sorcery, it's just like this natural thing that you can do. And oh, by the way, since you can do that, you can also you can also do these other things, and you also have these this ability to manipulate reality, and that's the kind of foundation of magic. And so it was sort of a gradual progression, and then as I adopted those philosophies, there's certain things like the moral relativism, like that we talked about. Maybe that's not the best example to keep using. There were other things, but there was sin. There was some bad decisions that entered, and those took me away from God. So it was kind of a combination of those two things: the idolatry and just the general stupidity. Um, and then I had never done drugs before at that point, and that experience made me super interested in psychedelics because I was like, I wanted to know if psychedelics would recreate that. So I tried a few things, and nothing really came close. Like I had some pretty crazy trips, and I got into drugs for a minute there. Nothing ever held a candle to it, which is kind of interesting to look back. Like this one sober night of just hanging out was like more intense than any of the drug abuse for the next couple of years.
Mm.
So again, like, was it in my mind? Maybe, I don't know, but it had an impact. The only thing that came close was DMT, because DMT does feel like you leave your body and you interact with other things. But it still wasn't the same. And then, I kind of got off drugs, was, I quit drinking for a year and a half, two during that time. And I was sort of just, get my life back together. And I never had issues with like spontaneous hallucinations or anything crazy like that. I got a little bit weird. My personality was a
Mhm.
little bit off because I was, driving my dopamine and adrenaline up all the time, but nothing like too unstable. But I was kind of settling down from that. And then the encounter with Christ was it was along the same lines where it was more powerful. And the difference with that, I think, well, there's a lot of differences, but I think one of the things is that I really felt like with Christ, I had zero control. The astral projection, I felt like I could kind of move around, I could manipulate things a little bit. I felt like I could do it again with the vision of the Lord. I did not feel that at all. I actually wanted to get away. I didn't want to have it when it started. I tried to end it, tried to get up and shake it off. I couldn't. I could not break out of it. Um, and that was very interesting. I wanted to hide and run, and it was very much so that like he wanted to say certain things and he wanted me to have a certain experience, and I was kind of just along for the ride. And the other thing with that too is he did leave me with questions. There was a lot of, open-ended stuff, but the astral projection, I spent years like, what in the world, what was the point of that? And even after becoming a Christian, it was a couple of years before I really like started to get a sense of like, why did that happen? Like at all. And I still don't really understand it, but I have some better ideas now. But with Christ, it was very specific. It was like, you need to fix these particular things, and you are burdened by a, a huge amount of just an insane number of different questions and different issues. And sort of my my resistance was mostly around, okay, I've seen all these things, I've learned so much stuff, I've had all these different experiences, and I'm kind of torn, these various occult traditions, and also like I'm not like totally against Christianity, but at the same time, it's not big enough to encompass what I have experienced. And at the same time, though, nobody has a for sure answer for me, so I don't know what to do. But I can't just discount the last couple of years. It's been too meaningful. I know too much. I don't know what to do. And his answer to that was very specific and very simple. And it was you know basically a reiteration, excuse me, of John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And he said that, and I was like, okay, what? Like, I don't get this. And then over the next month or two, I just kept going back to that, and I kind of came to the conclusion that I can't figure this out. I have no idea. I didn't trust God. I didn't trust faith in general. I was very angry at God, actually. And I kind of sort of saw Yahweh as being this a spiritual being, but not necessarily the creator. And I was upset with him for allowing me to go down this path and get confused and to be so bewildered. It's like, well, if you really do love me, like, make it simple. Like, why do I have to go through all this stuff? Why do I have to have all these doubts? Why can't you just tell me what to do if you're real and you really are who you say you are? But sort of, I think what Jesus wanted to tell me was, like, you don't have to figure that out. Like, I'll take you to the Father. You have to trust me. And in that experience, at that moment, I sort of realized, like, uh, that encounter with him, the love that I felt, the things that he showed me in terms of, I saw basically a scene of the crucifixion, um, and I kind of had this. Something clicked for me. I never really understood the gospel before that. I never understood, like, why would God become man and die for people until I experienced the love that He had for us. And when that clicked for me, that's when I started to realize, okay, I can't figure this out. I have no power here. You're offering to help me. And again, I'm not totally convinced, but maybe I'll take a step of faith and see what you do. And, what do you change? What do you teach me? Can you answer these questions? And sure enough, over time, it took that step of faith. It took me being willing to let go of a few things. Um, I think he did want me to take it on faith to some extent, but all those questions that I had, all the different doubts and the, my mind was so scattered, like trying to follow all these different um, occult trains of thought. I mean, you talk to people that are still in it, and it gets on my nerves because they're just all over the place. Like
Mhm.
you can probably tell I'm rambling a little bit. I'm a little bit manic and high energy, but times that by 1,000, except completely unfocused. Like it's so hard to get these people to really tell you what they believe because they don't really know. And the
Yeah.
way that they work through it is by jumping around to, these different inconsistent ideas that don't really mesh, but they kind of seem to in their head. And that's where I was. And all of those questions one by one ended up getting answered. And it was like, oh, that's like so simple. Like, how did I not see that before? Things started to change very tangibly in my life. Don't get me wrong, I'm not out of the woods. I'm not trying to say that being a Christian is easy. I'd say my life has gotten harder,
Mm.
actually. However, I do have a sense of purpose now, and I have some understanding of why those things are happening. And it's not harder because, I'm dealing with more consequences. It's harder because there's more responsibility
Yeah.
on me now. So yeah.
That's really profound hearing the differences between those two experiences. It does sound like there's a lot of lies and confusion
For
before,
sure.
when you were in the occult. What do you think are some of the biggest lies that the occult sells people today, or some of the most effective deceptions that get people into that?
I think flattery is a big tool. So, I mean, really, we'll keep it simple. Just go back to the Garden of Eden. The original lie is that you can become God,
Hmm.
and it's rarely framed that way. It is sometimes. I have this issue when I'm making content is that I have to have to figure out creative ways to say this because if I just say the New Age says that you are God, but that's
Yeah.
not true, people just like tune out. Because it took me a while to figure out like why, like it's so obvious, and I realized, well, they don't really see it that way. They see it as I'm manifesting something and I can take control of my life. I'm the master of my fate, and it all comes down to me. My vibration is what's attracting good or bad. My thoughts are what are producing all these different results. And it really comes down to me. It's like, okay, well, what's the difference between that and you being God?
Yeah.
You're in total control of your life unconsciously. The only problem is that you don't have enough knowledge to control your unconscious. You don't understand exactly what you need to do to heal. That's why you're not healed. It's like, well, actually, you can understand that you need surgery to heal cancer. That doesn't mean that that understanding is enough, right? Like you need intervention. And so on a spiritual level, you have to recognize you're not in control. And unfortunately, the new age puts a lot of pressure on people because everything in your life that's gone wrong is your fault. And
Hmm.
granted, on the other end of that coin is Christians who will rage against you, like, you're going to hell because of all this, that, and
Yeah.
the other. And it's like, that's not super helpful either. Thank you. Kind of annoying. But, there's this thought process that, like, I have to get everything right. Otherwise, I'm doomed. Um, like, if your vibrational frequency is what's attracting the bad things in your life, somebody assaulted you, somebody mugged you, somebody there was a predatory person that singled you out for whatever reason and came after you and hurt you, which happens unfortunately quite often. That's on you. That's your fault. You
Hmm.
manifested it. You were asking for it. And it's at the same time as they make all these, big political statements, and it's like pushing for what seems to be the polar opposite. And it's weird. It's like there's this really big cognitive cognitive dissonance in their philosophy and then the way that they conduct their lives. It's very strange. But to not get too far off of that, just look at, again, look at the Bible. I mean, when you're going to see within a lot of New Age and a lot of occult doctrines, it comes down to knowledge. It's enlightenment, quote unquote. When you become enlightened, then you're free from what? Well, all of it. What is enlightenment? What is this knowledge? What does it do to you? They can't tell you. And some people will say that they can, and every time I post a video, I get tons of people. Like, well, that's not true. It does this, that, and the other. Prove it. Like, you can't, you don't have to ask more than 2 or 3 questions to get to the bottom of their beliefs, and it's not on a good foundation. It's on built on assumptions. It's built on maybe sometimes it's traditions. They'll point to, well, it's karma. You're free from the karmic cycle of debt. It's like, okay, prove that. Like,
Yeah.
prove that to me. Give me any evidence, because Christianity hinges upon the resurrection, which is a verifiable historical
Mhm.
event. Um, and so, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, we can kind of take his word
Yeah.
for everything else, you know? So that's a good starting point, and we can have that conversation. You can't have that with other people. You can look at, say, the Tower of Babel. There's this idea of that, through my own effort and my own work, I will make a name for myself, or translate that to a spiritual sense. I will I will earn my salvation. I will earn my place among the divine ranks, and I won't be beholden to any deity anymore. I won't be under the authority of my creator. I can do this on my own. I started looking for stuff like that. You just look in anytime you see demonic influence in the Bible, kind of look at what are the themes here? What are they actually saying? What are they actually promising you? And if you think about that a little bit, you'll start to see how the generic statements and promises of the New Age and of the occult in general kind of echo that. And there's a lot of examples of that. I think the one that I use the most is definitely the garden. It's the original lie. It's your initiation of all these different pagan religions. So it comes down to that pretty neatly a lot of times. Not always, but often.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. To hinge off of that a little bit here, as we're going to wrap up here in a minute. How do you think the New Age and occult ideas tend to move into Christian thinking or churches? How do you see them from your experience, having been on the other end of the spectrum? How do you see the two kind of sometimes get blended or conflated together? How exactly does that happen?
Yeah. So a couple things. Again, it kind of depends on where you look. I would say that there's an issue with Christians not taking this stuff seriously, and so they'll play around with tarot cards, and they'll play around with astrology, and especially they're not necessarily like they're not trying to go out and it's like, I'm going to mix these philosophies. They don't think about what they're doing, and they don't think about the fact that yoga is a system of Hindu worship, and all of those poses are adorations to Hindu deities, that they're
Hmm.
meant to represent certain what's the word, certain scenes from this mythology, their worship. They don't think about that. They don't think about what meditation is, and that meditation comes out of that, right? Not biblical meditation, but biblical meditation, like, Joshua 1:9, for example. It's like meditating on the word of God is very different from clear your mind and don't judge anything that comes in. Oh, so if murderous thoughts of sexual deviance enter my mind, I shouldn't judge that, right? I should just let that have a foothold. Interesting. I should be empty? Really? Why? So that I can get in tune with myself, with my heart? Well, Jeremiah says that the heart is deceitful and wicked. So why would I want to do that, right? It's very
Hmm.
different. Like, meditation is different than uh in Eastern meditation is different than biblical meditation. Stretching is different from yoga. Yoga is not meant for those things. Uh, Astrology, horoscopes, they're not meant for entertainment. That is the oldest system of sorcery that we have. Tarot cards are not that much, they're not that far behind. And so people just don't think about these things, and they play around with, symbols of like the yin yang balance, and it's like, oh, balance is important. Well, yeah, balance in a literal sense is important, but that symbol represents mixing light and dark. So why would you want to pollute the holy and pure with the satanic? That doesn't make any sense. And that's really what that philosophy is saying, that there is no separation, that there's good and evil commingling and everything, which is back to the relativism thing. So there's that side of things where people just don't take it, they don't think about it, or they're not educated, and I can't blame them for that, because I made the same mistake, and it's understandable if you don't research this stuff, which you most people shouldn't. I mean, people like that are interested in that are a kind of, what's the word? There's certain people like us that are that's the way our brain works, and that's where we're going to do well. That's where we're going to be useful. But like the average person probably should not be like trying to understand, say, Hindu philosophy as well as Christianity, just because. Like if you're witnessing to that culture, sure, absolutely. But if it's just because like I think it could be as valuable, well, you need to get a better understanding of your own doctrine and theology first. So that's one side. The other side is sort of the fact that we are unfortunately influenced by our culture. And so when you have a society that's really heavily fixated on things like manifestation, it seems less shocking when a preacher brings up prosperity gospel, because it's like, oh well, this is all this pagan stuff except we're doing it through Christ. Awesome, I can get everything I want and manifest my reality according to my dreams. I just have to pray about it instead of meditate about it or stuff like that. And it
Mm.
kind of turns, unfortunately it turns God into something or someone to be used versus someone to be followed. And it's very, very, again, that's part of my issue with, not to fire any shots here, but it's kind of why I'm also interested in orthodoxy, is that it's a very different type of faith than you see in the early church. Because you read the saints, you read the early church fathers, people that died, that were martyred for their beliefs. They're not talking about how God's will is always yes and amen for you, and how he just wants you to prosper and succeed. It's, I hope that I will die well. I hope that when this lion eats me tomorrow, that it will be to God's glory, and that I won't chicken out at the last second and, lose that um compliment from God, that good and faithful servant. I care so much about following him to the very end and picking up my cross and taking it to the finish line, that it doesn't matter what happens to me in this life. And unfortunately, a lot of modern uh, Christianity is very focused on my experience. Did I get a good word today from the pastor? Did I feel the worship today? Was I moved by these songs or not? Because if I wasn't, then I must not be a good Christian. I must not feel the Holy Spirit. Versus, how can I actually lay down my life and follow Christ the way that he showed us to, which was to his own death, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be martyrs, but it does mean that we have to die to self. And I think that the biggest issue that I see is with Christians that kind of a little bit more savvy and realize, hey, I'm actually not going to mess around with these cultural things. I'm not going to play with tarot cards and Ouija boards, even though it's cool and people are doing it. I'm going to keep some distance there. Maybe they don't take it too seriously, but they don't touch it. The other problem where it sort of bleeds over is that they're not super aware of the doctrines and the philosophies, the principles guiding those things. And so when they show up in the church, and it's like a very it's very much focused on like, how can I get what I want out of this. That I see that same attitude in church as I do in a lot of these occult circles. And I don't want to make strong statements about like judging those people. That's not my place. I do think that it's dangerous though. And I think that that's probably the most relevant way that these things show up in the average Christian's life.
Yeah, that was a good answer. Thank you. And I agree too. I think that American Christianity is vastly different from what we see taught in the Bible and in the early church. Jacob, where can people find you at? And I got a YouTube and Instagram. Go ahead and plug all your content here if people are wanting to hear more of what you have to say on all of this.
For sure, yeah. I'm at Lamp of the Body, and that's on YouTube and Instagram. The best ways to reach me. TikTok hates me. It will not show my videos to anybody, so I wouldn't waste my time there. But yeah, YouTube and Instagram are probably my main focus right now.
All right, sounds good. Well, hey, thank you for coming on for this conversation. It was really cool to hear your perspective and your experiences in all of this, and hear someone that has shifted in and out a bit, because that tells me that you've put thought into this and that you actually had a quantifiable experience on multiple ends of the spectrum here, where you have something to say on the subject. I think, rather than just being taught as a Christian and staying a Christian your whole life. So, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here. I appreciate it. What'd you think, Isaiah?
I thought it was very good.
Very
Yeah.
enlightening. Or
Yes.
maybe I shouldn't say that. I'll have to meditate on it.
Yeah. maybe actually enlightening, unlike many of the deceptions claim to be.
It gives you a unique perspective if you are approaching this from a new age perspective. It's a healthy challenge, I think, to, even as Christians, we have to ask ourselves that, like, what if we're wrong?
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're not wrong? And I think you have to do that, whether you're Christian, whether you're New Age, whatever you believe, you have to ask that question. You have to play it from the, how does this play out if I'm not right? Not saying that Pascal's wager is something to bank your future on alone. It's an interesting argument, but it's not a solid soul foundation. But I think it's a good point to start asking questions.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what he talked about with the demon in the mirror, I think that's just, it's really objectively concrete. Like, you can't really, unless you just dismiss him as making the whole thing up altogether,
Yeah,
you can't
he
really
said he had
dismiss that out of hand.
Other people that would bring it up.
Yeah, you can't really just dismiss that out of hand. And it's like, you
could try, but I don't think
Yeah.
you're going to be satisfied with it.
And that's why I want to have like these diverse guests that have these experiences on too, like Jacob, like Karen Wilkinson, like Vicky Joy Anderson. Because it's like at a certain point, you get all these people that have all of these different experiences, and it's like, are they really all making stuff up? Because like if Jacob, I've seen some of his content, I haven't watched every single like reel that he does, but if he was making all of this up, wouldn't he stick to the new age to get that attention and talk about experiences that he has? It's like he has a very anti approach to it, where it doesn't seem like it's something that he's making up. It seems like it's very genuine, and you could, if you were making up this experience for attention, he could very easily sell that and just stay new age. And so I think it speaks to a deeper philosophy that sits there into this broad idea.
One thing he mentioned with some of the occult was that there's always questions and things you're pursuing. There's answers and knowledge that are offered, but what he said is that for himself and others he's talked to, it seems like they never really go anywhere. You've always got kind of an immediate goal, but when you zoom out, you're not actually getting anywhere. It's just one little pursuit after another, trying to get different answers and knowledge, and it always feels like you're advancing, but you're in the same place after doing it for years in your life.
Yeah, that is true, that you have to kind of step back and get perspective. And it's like, is this really going anywhere, or am I just like spinning my wheels in the mud here and thinking I'm going somewhere? And it is a question that you have to ask. I agree. So you got anything else?
Nope.
All right. Well, once again, producer for this show is Cordell. So thank you, Cordell, for supporting the podcast and the research that we do. So for those that want to be a producer, donation of $25 or more to the show will get you producer status. That you can do that through the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee. It can be any amount that you desire. If you want to support the show and you're enjoying our content, there's absolutely no pressure. It's just, hey, if you want to support the research and all the costs that go into the research and everything else that goes into creating this content. If not, again, no pressure for our listeners ever. If you can't do that, I ask, though, that you think about someone that might benefit from hearing this podcast. If you know someone that's interested in these topics that might be a future member of the Quad Squad, send them the podcast. Ask them to check it out, and we might get another listener that way. If you want to check out all the rest of our content, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube handles are all m.quad.musings, Facebook, Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. As always, you can email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. We want to interact with you as the listeners. We regularly handle listener correspondence on the show, so send us your confessions, concessions, contentions, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show, whatever suggestions you have, we want to hear from you. And if you want to connect with a like-minded community, we are working on building said community. We have a Discord server link that is in the description or show notes, and you can check that out and get connected there. So whether you've been listening on the earth with the mortals, in the stars of heaven with Enoch and the cherubim, or down in the depths of Sheol, we thank you for quantumly transcending time to join us for this epic spiritual discovery, and we hope you have a good rest of your night.